Hello, friends, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to the Jank Tank episode number 36. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'll be hosting for you today, and I've got both of the boys on the line. Christopher Sofsky, Teld is with us as well. Chris, I know we chatted about it a little bit here just a couple minutes ago, and I didn't really want to bring it up on the podcast, but a little birdie told me that one of your co-hosts has been out playing Commander lately. And y'all know that I play a decent amount of Commander, so all we really need to do is recruit Chris to the EDH life, and we can become the Commander podcast that we've always meant to be.
Right, yeah, there's definitely not enough Commander focus or Commander content in the community. Like, the world, it needs more.
Needs to hear our voice. They need to hear our very informed and, skillful opinions on Commander.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I've played 5 games of Commander, so I can basically say I'm an expert on the topic.
I mean, hear me out. Episode 1 of the Commander Tank, titled "Why Your Commander Deck Sucks."
I can say with utter confidence that I will never play another game of EDH in my life.
Yeah, I've been a big hater for a long time, but sometimes you get the urge to. I mentioned this a ways back. Sometimes you get the urge to just play Paper Magic, and that is the only way to do that. So here we are. I built a Wrath Weatherlight Stalwart budget deck, and I'm having a good time. Just playing some blue-white dudes and drawing cards.
It's happening, folks. This is episode 1 of the Commander Tank. Yeah, Chris, I think I actually played a Commander game with Chris once. I think we played a 5-person EDH game because we didn't get a 6th-person.
Miserable. Yeah, it was at Common Market.
Yes, it was at Common Market. I remember lending. I think I lent 2 of my decks to 2 of the other guys, so it was just me playing one of my decks against 2 other decks. I think you were playing the Night Chick from Dominaria, the black-white Night Chick.
I might have been. Oh, the only thing I really remember about that game is if you don't play Commander a lot, right, you have to constantly look at what other people's cards do, and there's 3 of them, and there's so much shit on the board, so it's constant. When there's a 5th person who's you can't just lean over, they're at the end of the table. They're just okay, whatever you're doing over there, you could tell me we're breaking the sound barrier on foot. It's a first in human history. I'd be cool, whatever you're doing over there, I guess. And I got shut out of the game very, very, very early, so then I was just kind of sitting there. I think that was the last time I played Commander, actually.
Yeah, 5-person pods have always sucked and will always suck, but this is not a Commander podcast yet. At least let us get to episode 40 of the Jank Tank, and then we'll consider once Teld has talked about it enough to wrap Chris into it, we'll convert over.
I started out as a Commander player. I had a Markov deck, and actually my single biggest Magic regret is I was moving back to Charlotte from Durham, North Carolina 2 years ago, and I was in this really weird, neurotic, nervous place, and I was handling every aspect of the move for 2 people, even though I was 80 miles away. Thank you, Steven Sofsky, you're the best. And I was just I got to get rid of all my Paper Magic cards. I want to declutter, and so I just kind of did ship and sell with Star City Games. So naturally I didn't get anywhere near the actual value of the collection, but it was worth it to me to not have to deal with the mechanics of selling it or whatever. But my biggest regret is that I put my Edgar Markov in there, and I should have just kept it as a souvenir of the first Magic product that I ever bought as an adult. That was my Commander deck.
Card's wildly expensive, if I remember right.
It is, but it's being reprinted this year for the first time, okay. So we'll see what happens. I sold a copy of Edgar Markov for $57 back in October with the intention of putting that money in a tiny little account and then rebuying it once it got reprinted. So if it hits $30, I'll just get another copy and I'll be up $27.
Oh, I mean, back in October of last year, it was only $50-something. There was a point where that card was well over $100.
It was $100, but I was using Card Sphere and stuff like that, so you kind of get a shoddier end of your cards, but you also buy cards dirt cheap, so it kind of all evens out in the end.
Okay, gotcha.
You could easily sell a Markov for $75-$80 with the right vendor if it's in good condition. But yeah, let's talk Cube, actually. Let's go ahead and talk Cube, save the Commander discourse for the middle of the episode. If you get that far, we'll go ahead and round back out to it, I'm sure.
Yeah. So basically the episode is going to be your Cube sucks. Why? Because you're a bad designer. And then we're going to talk about Commander a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, the incendiary title here, I guess let's take just a moment to explain that. That's my doing. If you're mad because, quote-unquote, your cube sucks or whatever,
Big mad.
That's a Timothy thing, not a Chris or Teld thing. But obviously, like, your cube doesn't suck. I'm going for clickbait here, all right? Work with me, people. Like, we're going to talk about pitfalls of cube design, especially for new cubes, though a lot of this applies to cubes that have existed and been played plenty of times as well. But the goal here is not to say, like, you suck as a designer if you do these things. It's more to be like, you know, the Jank Diver gaming community has been actually debuting a lot of cubes from a lot of different people who are like, I want to build my first cube, which feels awesome to be the place where people want to do that. But also we see kind of recurring problems come up that we discuss with the cube designers as we're playing their cube for the first time. And it's like, you know, why don't we put out an episode that kind of addresses a lot of those pitfalls, and why don't we name it something super clickbaity and super like rage inducing and stuff like that. So the title is not to say, okay, if you're making these pitfalls, you're actually just like a really shitty cube designer or something like that. It's just you know, we gotta beat the YouTube algorithm somehow to get those 40 or 50 views per episode. So clickbait title.
Tim named it this because he's a good-hearted person and he's just kind of kidding around. I didn't want to name it this because I actually feel this way, and I didn't want to reveal myself to be like the massive dick that I am. So it's kind of like one of those things where like Tim's like comfortable playing a bad guy on TV because he isn't one, and I don't want to play a bad guy on TV because I am one.
Well, also, maybe some of this just applies to our cube, or maybe these are lessons that we've learned. So maybe our cube sucks. Maybe Jank Diver Gaming cube sucks.
I don't want to think about the various ways that we fail the community every day.
some of the I'm sure every single little mini category I've spelled out here has applied to our cube at some point during its life.
Absolutely. I mean, if it hadn't, then we wouldn't be in any condition to discuss things that we think you should be bearing in mind while you're designing. Like, I mean, if we'd play Magic,
your cube sucks because our cube used to suck. That's...
Exactly.
Okay, before we do all that good stuff, of course, let's go ahead and remind the people that the best way to support the Jank Diver Gaming and Jank Tank podcast is to join our Discord server. Come draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals, talk about Cube, Retail Limited, and all things Magic. You can find links to our Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. We host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including our Peasant Cube on Saturday, which I believe has officially moved to the mornings instead of the nights, so it's an early morning Peasant Cube draft. We have our mainline Jank Diver Cube drafts on Sunday nights, F&M style drafts on Fridays where our players vote on a cube to play, as well as various guest cubes, you know, a lot of what we're talking about today, by members of our server throughout the week, so there's always plenty to do. I think we did Danelius's Peasant Cube yesterday on the server, or no, it wasn't yesterday, but it was sometime recently, Friday maybe, and we had a good time with that one as well. You can check out our socials on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld going 2-1 on a typical day on Twitch.tv/TeldTalks, TELD Talks.
Although, if anybody tuned in on Saturday morning for our Peasant Cube, I drafted a hot garbage black-white deck.
I don't think I saw that. What was the highlight or opposite of highlight?
Just a bunch of things that didn't work together. I was trying to do like Essence Reliquary stuff and just like didn't have it working out. I didn't have a keepable 7 for like 3 of my 5 games or whatever. It was just a bit of a mess all around. Probably could have drafted a little cleaner, but honestly, I got kind of caught up in some pet cards and probably, you know, let that distract me a little bit.
Gotcha. I missed that one completely. Okay, so new year, we're through all of the review stuff at the end of 2024, which felt like months and months of just reviewing cards and talking about cards, but we actually get to come back to basics here with a single card discussion, and the card that we've picked out for this week is Kellen Planar Trailblazer, which is the Red Savannah Lions from Foundations. I'm going to go ahead and reread the card for people as just kind of a refresher, but the reason we picked this one out is because it's kind of been a standout compared to where some of us thought it would land. And again, we should give Chris full credit here. I don't think the play pattern that Chris laid out in our Foundations review is exactly how Kellen has played out, but I think Chris definitely had this card pegged as something more than just what's written on the card. Like, there's a play pattern here to make this card a little bit better than it reads, and I think Teld and I have seen it in action a little bit over the last couple weeks and have been fairly impressed. You know, the card hasn't like redefined red or anything like that, but have been impressed because Teld and I were pretty low on it, and Chris was a little bit higher and persuaded us to try it out, and I think it has actually performed well. So Kellen, Planar Trailblazer, is a single red mana for a 2/1 legendary creature, human, fairy, scout. It can be your commander. We'll do the Kellen deck tech later on in this episode. 1 in a red. If Kellen is a scout, it becomes a human fairy detective and gains, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. And then for 2 in a red, you can level it up from there to become a 3/2 with double strike that has that same impulse draw ability. So 1 mana Savannah Lions, 2 mana to turn it into a kind of Ragavan of sorts, and then 3 mana to make it a 3/2 with double strike.
Yeah, so we get to play Kellen on turn 1, and, you know, we can give it double strike natively. So we really want to play Voltron with this. I think we're going to probably put some Swiftfoot boots in the deck to give it hexproof. Yes. And I'm sorry, that's for next week's recording. My bad.
And of course, Jessica's Will. You must play your Jessica's Will in every red deck. Yeah, so Commander deck tech another time. So, Chris, if you remember this conversation, feel free to like correct me, but I think what we were thinking here is Teld and I were low on this card because what you can't really do is go play Kellen on 1, level it up on 2, level it up on 3, and hope that everything is okay. And Chris's response to that was, well, this is a 1-drop that if you draw it on turn 5 or 6, gives you a place to just dump a bunch of mana, which is like way better than drawing any comparable 1-drop or any comparable Savannah Lions. But I think the way this has actually played out is more, you play Kellen on 1. If your opponent shocks it, they shock it. It's end of the deal, right? If they disfigure it or whatever, it's gone. Like, you don't have to worry about anything else with Kellen. And it traded 1 for 1 with a spell that either costs as much as Kellen or costs more than Kellen, which is all fine for a 1-drop creature. But if they don't immediately kill it, then what you do is you go 2-drop on turn 2, right? You play Inti or something on turn 2. And they have to kill your Inti, so they use a removal spell on Inti. Kellen gets in for a little bit of damage. And then you go 3-drop on turn 3, maybe, a Screaming Nemesis or whatever, which I know is like the dream curve, Kellen, Inti, Screaming Nemesis. But now they have to kill your 3-drop, right? And then maybe turn 4, you don't have like a great 4-drop to slam, but now you've got this mana sink sitting on board, and your opponents have already used removal on other things along the curve, and now you just start dumping the mana into Kellen. Or if you ever just have the 2 mana up because you're holding up like a Lightning Strike or whatever, and then your opponent just doesn't present something that needs to be Lightning Strike, you go ahead and filter the mana into Kellen. So I've actually seen quite often Kellen is getting to the point where it threatens to become the 3/2 on like turn 4, rather than like on turn 5 or whatever, because you just had a spare turn where you could turn it into the level 2 version. And the level 2 version is not a huge improvement over just Kellen as it is, but once you're on level 2, the level 3 actually becomes huge threat of activation, where you can just kind of attack in, and if your opponent wants to take a block, you can threaten the level 3 activation and eat their creature, so they often can't let it through, and then you don't have to activate, classic threat of activation. And then once you actually do get it leveled up, like, it becomes an actual machine, like a card advantage machine that kills your opponent in a couple hits. Great with Monstrous Rage, too. We saw that recently as well. So, yeah, Teld, you saw a little bit of Kellen in action as well, and I'm sure you've come around on it as well as being, like, a good addition to our cube. What have you been seeing going on with this card?
Yeah, I think the most common thing I've seen with Kellen that I hadn't really thought about it in the way that it actually played out is that line of holding up a burn spell, and then your opponent doesn't play a threat that's big enough to actually need to burn spell it, because now you level up Kellen and you attack, and like, if they played a 3 toughness creature, right? You now don't need to lightning strike that in the first place, or, bolt it or whatever, because now you can just threaten to activate Kellen. They can't block in the first place. And if they don't block, you can dome them for 6 if you want to trade, 3 mana to push through that extra 4 damage. You're kind of just converting Kellen's activated ability into a Ghostfire Slice or something. It plays really well with counters once you've got that threat activation too, Monstrous Rage, that sort of thing. Obviously broken with Monstrous Rage, that was another thing. And this is more of Monstrous Rage being good than Kellen being good, but anything that can gain first or double strike is just really, really broken when you can give a creature +3/+1 and trample. And so I think Kellen has played out more as like good role player for red aggro decks rather than like kind of stinker or really elite card. But yeah, being able to go just hold up 2 mana at some point, threaten a burn spell, your opponent kind of plays around it, you activate Kellen, and now like the threat of level 3 is a big deal. And then also just like there is the fact that your 1-drops now threatening 6 damage is like actually substantially better than a Savannah Lion. Like I think the overall package ended up being, as these cards often do, reads a lot worse than it actually plays, because it's pretty easy in Magic to find spots where you can sink a little mana in if the payoff is good enough, and for an aggro deck, being able to threaten that 3/2 double strike activation is really big.
Yeah, so Chris, I don't know if you've seen this card in action. You guys know that movie trope where it's like the coach needs to recruit some players, and there's like players out there who are like misunderstood. They're getting in trouble with the law, but like they're good. Like, and the coach is like, I want that person. I'm going to reform that. That's how Chris is with Magic cards sometimes with his card evaluations, where it's like, nah, this card's not worth it. And Chris is like, yeah, but I see something here. I see something in this card. And like, I think that's kind of what happened with Kellen, was Chris kind of saw the not necessarily the exact play pattern that Chris described of like top decking this on turn 6 and just immediately like dumping all the mana to have a decent 6-drop instead of a good 1-drop, but like definitely saw a little bit more in it than Teld and I did. So a little bit of credit where credit is due.
I think what kind of happened, and I did it, like I think if I remember correctly, we were all kind of doing this at first, and then I sort of took a step back. I think what we were initially doing was, because the mana progression is, if I'm remembering correctly, the mana progression is that it's a 1-drop. I mean, I know that for sure. And then the first activated ability is 2 mana, and the second activated mana is 3 ability. Like, I think our brains all kind of shortcutted to like, oh, the idea here, the joke is that you play this, you activate it on 2, you activate it on 3, but the things that it does when you activate it are not good if you do them in that order. And then I just, but I mean, like you mentioned earlier, it's just like, okay, well, this is a 1-drop that if you draw it on, turn 5, you can turn it into a really meaningful creature next turn in decks that are sometimes starved for things to do, or you just chip in like an attack or 2, and then it becomes relevant later. So I just think we got a little hung up on like, oh, you're supposed to do this like progression, and that sort of made us lose sight of the fact that it's just like a 1-drop that's a great mana sink.
Does this give you guys hope for Savannah Lions in the future? Like, is this what a Savannah Lions needs? Is just a mana sink ability on it to like make it relevant later on? Is that what pushes Savannah Lions back into relevance?
Usher has one.
Usher kind of has one though, right?
Yes.
Like, it usually trades off and leaves a 1/1 behind, which is less like an effect you can get out of 2-drop creatures anyway.
Right, and it's not like exactly. That's not fabulous for 2 mana. And back when Usher came out, people were, super thrilled, best Savannah Lions of all time, yada yada. But like, this is a Savannah Lions that can get relevant keywords, get bigger, and create card advantage. That's a huge spike over what Usher can do.
I mean, at this point, like, Doom Traveler is not an exciting card. So giving Doom Traveler a 2nd point of power, but making you pay a 1/1 or pay 2 mana to get a worse creature token, like, I know it's a little convoluted but you get my point, right? Is like, you can just pay 1 mana and get a Doom Traveler, and like, if they printed a 2/1 Doom Traveler, I don't think anybody would lose their mind. It would be a much better card than Usher, and it'd be a good card. Right. But nobody would lose their mind over 2/1 Doom Traveler.
No, also, like, not obviously the same card at all, but if you look at a card like Splitskin Dull, which is 2 mana for a 2/1 that when it ETBs, you draw a card if you control another creature with power 2 or less. In the decks you play Splitskin Dull, it like almost always does that, right? So if you're like thinking about Usher and you're thinking about that, I know it's a 2-drop, but it's like, okay, for 1 more mana than Usher and 1 less mana than playing Usher and activating it, I played a 2/1 that drew a card instead of making a 1/1 dude. Like, Usher's fine. But, like, point being, yes, like, I think they've, considering how excited people were about Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter a number of years ago, this is kind of wildly better than that.
Mm-hmm. And the funny thing, too, is this is a Foundations card, so, like, it's supposed to set the bar for a 1-mana 2/1, right? Which means I'm still of the opinion, we'll see with Ether Drift and some later sets this year, but I'm still of the opinion that setting the bar with cards and Foundations means that we're going to be getting better versions of those cards in the surrounding sets. so as not to field out the new stuff. So I wonder if Kellen is just like testing the waters on trying to push a red 1-drop, and if we're going to see that permeate throughout sets this year with additional like powerful 1-drops in red. We don't know yet. We won't know until Ether Drift at the earliest, but I'm assuming a vehicle heavy set is going to need some 1-drop creatures to kind of start crewing things up early and whatnot. So we'll see. I have been pleasantly surprised with how Kellen has played out.
Yeah, I'm gonna assume that Heartfire Hero was a mistake this year rather than like an intended plant, because I think if they'd intended for it to be the kind of multi-format all-star it is, then it would have probably been a rare. So I'm gonna assume that was more just, oh, this card is oops, accidentally super awesome. But in this,
I still wonder how much of that is Monstrous Rage, though.
Yeah, possibly. But like Kellen and Hired Claw both came out this year, and they've been solid 1-drops. So like we did get a couple of good red aggressive 1-drops this year, and yeah, I do agree with you. If you're not playing Monstrous Rage, I think we've hyped this card up before, but like one of our guys who specializes in aggro, and he occasionally comes in to dumpster our server by drafting mono red. It does it every time. He is under the opinion that Monstrous Rage is the best red aggro card in the cube, and I tend to agree. That card is really, really broken if you're not playing it.
It's an incredible card. Yeah, we had a whole episode on combat tricks last year if you want to go listen to us gush about Monstrous Rage and Tyvar Stand and stuff like that. But yeah.
Sorry, real quick, Teld, did you suggest Monstrous Rage for the cube because it had been performing in constructed, or did you kind of like conceptualize that it would be good first and then it just like happened to be good in constructed?
I think it was the second one. I think we played it I want to say we played it in the Neo Cube, and it was really impressive. And then we played it in the Peasant Cube, and it was really impressive. And it was like, well, we could try the mainline cube. It's like kind of just pushing a bunch of damage. So I think that was the progression. Is we just played it in a bunch of Peasant Cubes, and it was just such a ridiculous overperformer that we decided to try it.
Rule number 1, your cube sucks because you still think Galvanic Discharge is better than Monstrous Rage. It is not.
Yeah.
Monstrous Rage is better.
Yeah, I would say Monstrous Rage is like... I know you would first pick Lightning Bolt over Monstrous Rage, but I think if you're in red aggro, I actually think it might be to the point where Monstrous Rage is just straight up better than Lightning Bolt, which is a wild thing to say about a combat trick.
They're definitely decks. The Prowess style decks, I think I like with a bunch of Prowess creatures. I think I want Monstrous Rage before Lightning Bolt, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, you take Lightning Bolt because you're gonna table Monstrous Rage. Like, let's be honest, but
right now maybe still, but I think people are coming around. Like you can only body somebody with Monstrous Rage so many times before they're like, maybe there's something to this Monstrous Rage card.
This is the Tyvar Stand conundrum, where Tyvar Stand went from being picked as like a last pickable sideboard style card to being like top 5 green card, and you should take it as such.
Yeah.
Okay, do we want to talk about why everyone's cube sucks and ours is perfect or whatever?
Yeah, let's do it.
However people are going to extrapolate from this. Oh,
yeah.
All right, so again, why your cube sucks, this is basically a compilation of pitfalls that we see mostly with new cube design, but not exclusively to new cube design. I think a lot of this applies to cubes that have existed for a long time. I could actually say some of this applies to like the vintage cube, but like if I attack the vintage cube, people will attack me, and I'm just like not in the mood for that right now. So
yeah, the vintage cube is perfect. There's no flaws, nothing wrong with it whatsoever.
Nothing wrong with it.
I want to qualify something that you just said too, and this is not like intended to ruffle any feathers. I think from my perspective, it's just a matter of fact. If you have been curating a cube for a really long time, but you've played it like 5 times in 8 years, you're not technically a new cube designer, but from the perspective of like the feedback on the design that you've created, you kind of are, if that makes any sense. So I think even if you've had a cube for a really long time, I wouldn't tune out just because you've owned your cube for a really long time. If your cube is more of a collection of cards than board game that people play a lot, there might be some stuff in here for you that can maybe make you think a little bit about how you design certain things, or maybe revisit some ideas.
And a lot of some of the stuff we're going to mention too is stuff that might be intentional. It might be something you want in your cube design, and if that's the case, like we're not trying to change your mind. Like I'm going to go for my go-to example. If you want to play blue-black ninjas in your cube, and that's just something you want to see in your cube, like I'm not here to tell you you can't do that or you shouldn't be doing that, so much as like there is a cost to doing that when it comes to like trying to make sure your drafters have a good time, which is kind of like, at this point, my goal is to make sure my drafters are enjoying the cube more so than like, this is the cube that I want to play. But yeah, we're not trying to persuade you to do things that like you have locked in, like this is what I'm doing no matter what. Okay. That's completely up to you.
All right. Retrospective retitle on the episode, not why your cube sucks, why your cube isn't fun. We should still publish it under why your cube sucks, but like that's what we mean. Why your cube isn't fun.
Yeah, and we don't, again, we come from this perspective that, like, in the span of 1 to 2 months, we probably play our mainline cube more than most people do in the entire year for their cube. Yeah. So we just get an immense amount of volume by comparison, and to the point that, like, right now we're in a card lull, and our cube feels a little solved. Like, there's been a kind of I think a soft ask for some shakeup, simply because it's just people know what the good archetypes are, and if you're not trying to be creative and push boundaries, you just draft the same decks over and over again.
Draft white aggro, you cowards.
All right, let's get into this. So reason number 1 why your cube sucks, and this one actually applies very heavily to new cube designers in particular, but your themes are too narrow. And we've mentioned this multiple times. Chris has, brought it up multiple times, where people on the cube subreddit will come in with their new cube and they'll say, like, what do I do with Gruul, or what do I do with Selesnya, right? And you check out their cube and it's like, okay, you've got some cool things going on, but you're clearly like trying to make your 2 color sections do certain things. Like, you came into this saying, I want blue black to be ninjas, I want red green to do this, I want red green to be dinosaurs or whatever, and you've already locked yourself behind really narrow themes, which is why we preach like emergent archetypes, and we've had an entire series on cube design where we really incentivize people to build out monocolored sections before 2 color sections, and kind of let the 2 color sections build themselves from the rest of the cube. But it's very, very easy for people to come in and make their archetypes or their themes like super narrow, but also just the theme of a cube in general, right? And one comes to mind. We are not going to name anyone's cubes by name in this episode, because I don't want people to take it personally or anything like that. But we've definitely had cubes that debuted on our server where like the overall premise of the cube is narrow, or is trying to like present a cool concept that's just not supported. Remember, we're playing on Arena, so we're already working with like a limited card pool. But just imagine somebody came to us and they're like, I have a cube I want to debut. Okay, that's cool. What is it? It's my Dungeons and Dragons cube. Mm-hmm. It's composed of dungeons and dragons, and it's like, okay, that's a cute idea, I get it. And the dragon thing is probably like, there's probably enough to make that work, right? It's going to be super battle cruisy, super haymakery, but sure, dragon cube can exist. But the dungeon part of it, like, first off, how many cards in Magic exist with the whole dungeon mechanic on them? Second off, how many are actually that compelling? And third off, like, what's the power level disparity between all the cards that you would have to play to make that even try to work, right? It's just, as a concept, it's cute. Like, you can kind of see what a designer would be going for with something like that. But, like, in actuality, is that going to work out? Is that even going to be a fun experience for people who are, like, jamming dragon decks against venturing the dungeon decks? No. Like, that's just... That's not a cube that I think I would want to play, until at least a couple more sets come out that, like, flesh out the dungeon part of that. And I would still be looking to see if there are, like, dragons that play into the dungeon theme, which feels like such a stretch. So that's the type of thing I'm talking about, where people are coming with these really thematic, cute ideas, or these novel ideas that just aren't fleshed out by the cards that actually exist within those themes, on top of, like, creating 2 color sections and 3 color sections and stuff like that that are just super narrow.
It's not necessarily, it's like, we're not saying it's a bad idea to do a theme cube. Theme cubes can be super fun and they can be really flavorful and great. Just like, make sure that if you're doing like an overarching theme for the entire cube, just make sure that the depth is there, right? Like, for the theme. Because if you try to do something with the depth that's not there, like, what's going to happen is, and we've seen this time and time again with cubes like this, is your spikier drafters, if you have them, are just going to identify what the most raw powerful cards in the cube are, and if there's not a lot of depth to your theme, there is going to be a really big power discrepancy, from the best cards to the worst cards. They're just going to play a pile of the best cards, completely ignore your theme, and then make all of your players feel like trying to do your theme is not the way to win games.
Yeah. These narrow cards too, like, we see Venture every one. We may never see Venture again.
I hope we don't.
I mean, I assume at some point we probably will, if not in like arena draftable sets, at least supplemental sets. But stuff like rooms, for example, if you wanted to make a rooms deck in your cube, you're just not likely to see rooms again for a long time. So your chances of getting support for it are really low. Whereas if you take a step back, and you can do this in interesting ways, but every set's going to have instants of sorceries. Every set's going to have tokens. Every set's going to have +1 counters. Every set's going to have exile effects. You can get some like the exile effect thing. I remember in Strixhaven, there's like a 1/1 that every time you exile a card, it gets a +1 counter. And you could probably do something with that, right? Like that's the kind of thing that every set, even though that is a little bit narrow in terms of what it's doing, you could make that something in your cube that works because every set's going to have support for it. But not every set will have support for very specific archetypes. So you can do interesting things, but you just need to think about how often are we going to actually get cards that make this deck work.
Yeah, Rooms is a great example because it's literally tied to a single set. Whereas, there's rumors that Ether Drift is going to bring Energy back, and Energy kind of has like 3 sets worth of cards now to the point where you could kind of get there on an Energy deck. But even if you do that, let's say Energy comes out and you rework part of your cube to include Energy, when is the next time you actually expect to get support for that? Like years down the line, probably, especially because they break it every single time it comes back. So you're just going to end up with a stagnant theme in your cube as well. That's fine if you're like the type of person who likes rotating themes in and out, but it's not great if you're not one of those people, right? If you're not constantly checking your cube and like changing up what it does, like you don't want to introduce stagnant themes because you're just not going to get support for them. Everything else is going to be changing around them, but that Energy deck is just going to look the same from iteration to iteration.
So like one way that you can approach this problem, if you're going to do like a really powerfully themed cube, right? Like let's say you're going to do like an archetype cube. And Tim, this isn't like a comment necessarily like on your Affinity Cube design. It was just something that I kind of started thinking about like theoretically because of some of the discussion around it. Blue, black, and red obviously all have incredibly deep and storied like artifact themes, right? So if you were going to do like an artifact cube and you did a Grixis cube, you have like red, black artifact sacrifice, blue-red artifact combo. There's all kinds of cool interlocking things you can do with artifacts in those colors, right? White these days has like equipment stuff going on. It has like obviously stuff like Stoneforge, and then that whatever fiddlebender guy who can like stack artifacts to tutor other artifacts. White has some cool stuff you can do. Green is starting to get some more artifact related stuff, but green traditionally has been the color that like despises artifacts, right? That goes with the fluff of the whole color pie or whatever. So one of the things that like a green theme in an artifact cube can become, if you're not careful, is it becomes the control color. It just becomes like the color that hates the theme of the cube. And not everybody enjoys that, right? So a very simple solution is if you can't find good green artifact themes that work and compete with your colors that have deeper artifact themes, maybe you just play a 4-color cube. Like maybe that's the answer.
It's an option.
I'm gonna push back a little on that because I think it's up to the designer and stuff, but sure. I think you have to be careful with the kind of effects you're including. Like you don't want to include too many, Reclamation Sage, Necrotal type cards, and you don't want to include too many artifact board wipes. But I think it's kind of nifty that in an artifact cube, and we've seen this in Tim's cube, the green deck ends up being the control deck a lot of times. Like you end up being I'm going to play my naturalizes and I'm going to police the table a little bit to keep all of you from being too degenerate. And I think it's kind of cool because oftentimes green is the color that's doing the big splashy things. And I think it's kind of cool when green gets to color shift a little bit and take on a different role inside of the cube. That's obviously personal preference. Like I think it's really cool, and I could see if you don't. One thing I wanted to bring up too was in our Neo Cube, we were talking about, like, this is actually good because of the artifact and enchantment thing. Like in the original Neo set, white, red was samurais, blue, white was vehicles. And like those just have no tie-ins to other decks.
Yeah.
So when we redid the cube, we actually made things that would thematically tie in with those. And so this is like one of the dangers of of those really narrow themes too is that you don't have any room to modulate. And I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but like if you're playing your energy cards, right, and you've got, I'm going to use Aetheric Marvel because that card is really broken and banned in Standard when it was in it. If that card's too good, right, and that's your big energy payoff for your deck, you might not have a good like tier 1.5 energy payoff to switch out to. The more narrow cards just have a very specific subset of cards that you have to play. And so if your payoffs are too good, if your enablers are too good, you don't have room to step down from like the S tier card to an A tier card like you would with more fleshed out archetypes. And so, you know, these like narrow cards, I think we're going to get to this, but like these narrow cards oftentimes also have the compounding problem of being like cards are way too good or way too weak.
On top of also some narrow cards require you to use up cube equity to support them, right? Like there was actually a time in the Jank Diver game in Cube where we played Drakehaven, which you know is a cycling payoff or a discard payoff, and it like kind of did cool things, but it also required us to use up 4 or 5 slots on either cycling cards or specific looters we wouldn't be playing otherwise and stuff like that. And it was like in the end it was like, was it really worth introducing like this really narrow package of cards? Remember red white equipment? We played red white equipment for a month and a half in the Jank Diver game in Cube, and it was very clear that like this theme is too narrow. This theme is way too narrow. It doesn't cross-pollinate with the other themes. It's requiring us to use up cube equity on cards that really don't go into any other deck. And when it all comes together, it's still a tier 2 deck compared to the best things you could be doing. So like it was just too narrow. So we cut that sort of stuff from our cube a long time ago.
So I'm going to touch on a couple of things real quick, and I'm going to try to keep it organized. If you are going to do a cube that's not broadly about really narrow themes, but you're in one color pair, you want to do a really narrow theme, during the draft, those cards are going to stick out, and most of the time, people are just going to pass on it for like the broadly powerful, open-ended cross synergy stuff that's like available in other colors, right? Because most of the time, if you have a draft environment, your players are skilled. If they don't have to paint themselves into a corner, they're not going to. Like an example of a very strong theme that we have in the Jank Diver Gaming Cube that is not actually narrow is sort of the Is It Spells thing, and it's not actually narrow because a bunch of red creatures have prowess and there's a bunch of burn in red decks, right? Like, that's not necessarily a narrow theme. A lot of the blue spells you'd be supporting that theme with, like cantrips and shit like that, are just good in blue decks, right? But the example you just pointed out, the equipment theme, if most of the colors just have sort of these broadly powerful mid-range control and aggressive strategies, maybe with some like build arounds that work well with like really specific builds but aren't entire packages, and then there's like this red white just unpack the cube and like put the deck together type of deck, like broadly speaking, people are just not going to play with those cards, and it doesn't matter how much intention that you put into a design as a designer. Like you could make like it would be the example of like making a movie that you think is really, really high concept, but if nobody wants to watch it, it doesn't matter if it's good, kind of a thing.
Yeah, the trick is it doesn't matter. Like there's a thing about creativity being like, it's not the creative isn't being able to perform a trick, it's having people ask you to do it again. And so like if you're just unpacking the cube, it's not fun to draft, it's not fun to put together the decks because there's not a lot of decision making, then like who cares how creative and interesting and interlocking your synergy is if like it's just not fun to be part of the draft experience.
Right. It's cool. It's cool as a designer, and I see this in the Jank Diver Cube all the time. Like it's full of generically powerful cards, right? Like Chandra 4 and just like all kinds of stuff. But it's really, really cool when you have like all these kind of like powerful cards that have some open-ended kind of micro synergies sort of across the board. Occasionally, I'll just like get onto the Discord and look at a 3-0 from a recent Jank Diver Gaming Cube, and I'll be like, I would not have put any of these cards together in the same deck. Like, I personally would not have thought to do that, but like looking at it, I understand why you did, and like that's pretty cool. One thing I do want to say on the flip side is I don't want to necessarily like trash the idea. Like, I can totally understand the compulsion to design a cube where all 10 of your colored pairs have like really strong distinctive themes, and that's what they do. I think that's especially acceptable if your cube doesn't get played like all the time, so that doesn't get stale really quickly, right? If you have a cube group that's like drafting that cube every single week, that is going to get stale eventually. That kind of like, okay, I read what thing was open in the draft and that's what my deck is. That is going to get old like relatively quickly. But let's say you only cube like a couple times a year. You have these themes that you really love. You want to play with these decks, and you basically are making like an unshuffle the themes type cube. That's totally fine. However, going back to that thing that Tim mentioned a minute ago, which is that classic MTG cube post. I've got like these 8 color pairs figured out, but I can't figure out what to do with Simic or Gruul. Well, there are themed cards in these colors, right? But they don't, like, because they're so all over the place with them, like Simic is just always like some new random thing that's often not even that good in the draft format, and then they don't touch it again or whatever else, whereas like Izzet is like the same thing every time. It's artifacts or spells. So if you're going to do like a, spin the wheel, unpack a deck type cube design, and your blue-red theme is artifacts or spells matter or whatever you tried to shoehorn Simic into, probably not going to be as good or as synergistic. So anyway, where I'm going with this is, if you insist on having all 10 of your color pairs being really specifically targeted, if you want your cube to be fun to play, if you don't want somebody at your table sitting there like thinking they've already 0-3'd the draft because they had to draft the thing that everyone knows is not as good as everything else, then it's incumbent on you to find more niche themes than like the broadly obvious stuff in the color pairs that have a bunch of options, so that like the blue-green counters deck in your cube isn't just the worst thing to be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and even like in our cube, if I look at some of the more narrow cards, because we do have a few cards that are kind of, I don't want to say pigeonholed, but a little more narrow. Like Delny is one that we bring up a lot because it's a really cool engine, but it is asking you to do a very specific thing. But I think in the current iteration of the cube, you could probably pull that thing off in any color combination that doesn't involve green. And honestly, if you told me there's a way to pull it off in green with like Tristani and some stuff like that, I'd believe you. I just don't think that that's generally going to be very good. But like, I can see playing Delny, for example, with Mischievous Mystic in blue, and then like double drawing off of our looters like Kitza or something like that, and double triggering our Mischievous Mystic. I don't know if that's good. I haven't drafted it, but I'm just saying that like, I think there's lanes where some of these cards that are, even if they're a little more narrow than some of the other options, you do still have flexibility in what you can pair them with, which I think is something you should be looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty big topic to kick things off. Let's go ahead and go to the second point here, which the second reason your cube sucks is you're just power maxing for the sake of power maxing. I'm saying power maxing to a fault here, and the biggest example I can think of here is peasant cubes, paper peasant cubes that adopt the philosophy that you should just play the absolute best cards available to you, like taking out consideration of balance and just play the best cards and let the cube develop itself this way. So literally, if you just ranked every Magic card from top to bottom, you would pull out the top 360, 450 cards and be like, that's my peasant cube. And the card that always comes to mind for me is Skull Clamp, but also there's things like Sylvan Library and Force of Will that are, Swords of Plowshares. These are all uncommons, and they're like, an entire tier and a half above like everything that comes below them. And my experience with that is it makes for an unfun experience if you're not the person who gets those cards, right? Because somebody's going to be skull clamping against you, whereas you're playing just normal peasent cards.
Steady clamping.
Always be #be clamping.
Always be clamping.
Time Vault in Vintage Cube was one that they actually recognized was just like, we don't need to do this. Time Vault, plus Manifold Key or whatever, Voltaic Key was like the best thing you could do in Vintage Cube, and it was just an unfun experience, so they took that out. And an example for our cube would be playing like the pitch elementals, Solitude, Fury, Grief, stuff like that. We could go power max. We have a timeless cube, that Mop maintains where that sort of stuff is viable. But for our cube, it just feels like playing pitch elementals, Ragavan, Minskin Boo, things of that power level is just creating a whole nother tier that trumps everything below it. And we're kind of balance freaks here. Like, I don't think a cube necessarily has to be balanced if the cube designer has specific goals in mind. But I do think, as a drafter perspective, when you sit down and there's just a huge power disparity between the cards you drafted and the stuff that gets played against you that you might have not even known was in the cube, like, that just feels terrible from the drafter perspective, you know, especially if you're drafting for the first time against a bunch of veterans who know what's up and stuff like that. So I think there's people out there who treat Cube as a playground to play the absolute most powerful cards, and things like Power 9 get a pass in Vintage Cube, even though they create unfun game experiences, in my opinion. Like, I think Power Maxing, just for the sake of Power Maxing, is detrimental to most cubes, especially cubes like ours, where, like, there's kind of a through line. There's kind of like the 7 to 9 range of power across the board. There's kind of flat power level for the most part, and then you have these 10s that just dominate everything below them. That's the type of stuff we try to avoid. It's the type of stuff that I see in cubes that are debuting quite often, where, like, you will hear it from your drafters. The very first thing they will always say for every new cube that debuts in the Jank Diver Gaming Discord is, oh, this is a power outlier, or why is this here, or, you know, why did we include this card? This card seems way better than everything else. And the card that comes to mind is usually Fabled the Mirror Breaker, because people just put it in every cube for some reason.
Well, I have enchantment and treasure themes, guys.
Yeah, exactly what he just said. Like, don't design, like, an enchantment-themed cube and then be like, oh, well, it's a good enchantment, so I'm going to play Fabled the Mirror Breaker. Like, use your head.
It's so much better than everything else, just on power level. Like, thematic stuff aside, synergy aside, Fable the Mirror Breaker just ends up being so much more powerful. So unless you're going for a specific power level where that's the type of card you want dominating games, like, you shouldn't do that sort of thing. You shouldn't have intentional power outliers, and your players will tell you what they are. Like, come draft with us, come draft with people like Doug or Theo or whoever, you know, the actual spikes in our community, and they will let you know what the power levels in your cube are. But my general rule of thumb is to avoid power outliers if they're just the type of cards that dominate games on their own and, like, clearly outclass everything else in the cube. Either oops all power outliers, or, like, try to trim those 10 out of 10s in an environment of 7s and 8s.
Yeah, well, so I just want to point out something really quick. Like, you mentioned Vintage Cube. If the point is that, like, you can channel Fireball, like, if that is the point of the cube, then there's no problem with Power Maxing just a Power Max. Like, yeah. Mop maintains the Timeless Cube, and the whole point is that, like, if you lose to something, you're like, oh, that card's stupid. Well, then you showed up to the wrong party. Right? Like, that's the point of what's going on, and that's totally fine. I think when I think of, like, don't power max just to power maxes, if your intention is not to have players be like, oh, fuck, I lost on turn 2 to this impossible start, if that's not the point, if the point is to just cube, right? Don't put, so we have, like, we play, like, a fair cube, right? Like, that's the idea. We're not going to necessarily put, like, the best green 5-drop that's available in our card pool in the cube just because it's the best available green 5-drop and it feels like you're supposed to put the best available green 5-drop in your cube if you can. That's not the point. And if you're creating experiences for your players where, like, I don't know, they just, like, accelerated out this, like, hexproof thing that makes 4/4 tokens every turn and also, like, tells me that my mom smells bad once on my upkeep. Like, that's not a good design decision, right? But it's totally fine if, like, the point is, like, a Vintage Cube type experience. If that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. Just don't mindlessly.
There's a place for it.
Don't mindlessly power max in environments where, like, that's not the express purpose of your design, because you will create feel bad experiences, and it's okay if, like, feel bad experiences happen occasionally. Like, we're cube designers, we're fallible. Occasionally we're going to play something that, like, your player who's not putting any skin in the game by, like, presenting a product for criticism is going to give you shit about. Like, that's going to happen, but just, it's something to be mindful of. Don't mindlessly power max is how I would frame it.
Yeah, I do think a good rule of thumb, too, for people in our community who are building cubes, especially these more lower power or more, you know, thematic synergy type experiences, is if you play in our regular cube pretty frequently, like, if your cube is trying to do something a little more specialized, a little weaker, lower power level, and you're playing cards that are either premier threats in the main cube or cards that we have banned out of the main cube, maybe reconsider. Like, I'm not saying you have to, just it is like a rule. I would say a good rule of thumb, though, is, like, if you're looking and you're like, all right, well, you know, I lose to, I'm going to use Vorinclex or Oculus as an example every week in the mainline cube. Maybe we don't put this, like, maybe we don't put Vorinclex in our Mold Drifter cube, right? If we're just trying to, like, if we're playing a bunch of dorky draw cards, because it does draw cards, so that would just be like kind of a thought, because that's one of the things I usually look for when I'm looking at new cubes and they're these like more synergistic environments. I'm kind of looking and seeing like, okay, are there any cards that we don't play in our cube because they're too good, or are like the top 5 cards of each color in our cube? And it gets a little wonky when you're talking about a card like maybe like Malcolm or Split Skin Doll, that are really good cards but are a little more grease the wheels kind of cards. Those I think you can get a little away with a little more. I guess I think more towards like the big haymakery type cards.
And this is not to say that like what we've done with our cubes is the authority on like what's acceptable on the arena power level or anything like that. But when we see a peasant cube, someone's debuting their cool new peasant cube and Imidane Recruiter shows up, it's like, we know that card is busted. The designer might not. The designer might not draft our cubes. The designer might not have played with Imidane's Recruiter. They might not have played Wilds of Eldraine, but like, that's the type of thing that's going to stand out to us. And here's the thing is like, if you're literally giving your cube a crack for the first time, you might not actually know what those power outliers are.
Hell no, we've made all kinds of mistakes. Holy shit. We've made mistakes knowing we were, like, about to. Like, we put cards in the cube that would be the equivalent of, like, walking onto a moonshiner's property at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, we knew we were probably fucking up, but we did it anyway.
Yeah, so, my point there being, like, iterate on it down the line. Once you've identified, like, it should be 2 to 3 drafts in, the power outlier should be the cards that are winning every single time and feel terrible when they're winning. Like, people are like, yeah, I just completely crushed with this, or I got completely hosed by that. Like, that's when you can start iterating on that sort of thing and be like, okay, maybe this Skull Clamp in my peasant cube is a little bit too much. Maybe this Bitter Blossom is just a little bit too hard to beat. Maybe I should actually take that out. And maybe I didn't know that right away. Like, oh, Bitter Blossom looks like it'd be a cool card. Stoic Sphinx looks like it'd be a pretty cool card.
Oh god, the Sphinx.
That sort of thing. So
the Sphinx.
Like, you're not expected to get the power level right from day one. But you should be expected to kind of like work on it over time. Again, with the bar that Chris mentioned of like, the point of the cube is not necessarily to just do the most broken thing you can do.
Yeah, I want to bring up one more thing too, is that, and this one comes up a lot, Triomes are infinitely more powerful than however powerful you probably think they are.
Yeah,
Triomes
they're
are
good.
I've come to the opinion that Triomes in a cube are low-key the most busted thing you can actually put in a cube, especially if you include fetch lands. It gets to a whole new level of silly when you include fetch lands, but just Triomes' ability to allow you to play literally everything means that those power outliers get a spotlight put on them, because like, if a card has a really restrictive mana cost, or it's like multicolor gold card that's really powerful, presumably in a certain archetype, if you have Triomes, you're suddenly able to just jam a bunch of those together, and you're able to combine cards that were meant to be for different decks. It's much easier to just pick and choose the best cards across the board. Mm-hmm. So Triomes just end up, I think, raising the power of the top cards quite a bit, especially if they're gold cards.
You usually think Power-Maxing in terms of like creatures, and usually not removal, right? Because you can only power max removal so much, but like even things like Sunfall. But that's a good point, that you can actually take your mana a little bit to the extremes, which I think the default for most people is just to play the absolute best mana fixin' you can. And I think there's like probably an argument for that. I think a lot of people would disagree with us that you shouldn't just play the best mana you can, but we have found it to be problematic in certain situations where like having too good of mana fixin' does mean that 5-color pile ends up being the best deck, and kind of shits on a lot of your design goals when people are just jamming every card in every deck and just kind of playing strong card dot deck or whatever.
Okay, let's. There's a potential scenario where, like, and this is purely theoretical because I don't think the scenario exists, but there is a theoretical situation where you are maximizing power to the greatest extent you possibly can, and somehow you also have a flat power level. Purely theoretical. I don't think this exists in Magic, but let's say you could do it. Making the mana really great in that scenario isn't necessarily problematic, because like if you have a flat power level, then like a truly flat power level, then like a black-white deck is not necessarily going to be weaker than like a 4-color deck. What having fabulous mana, like really fabulous mana, does is if you do have really big power outliers in between your various strategies, then it's going to exacerbate those, because people are just going to take all the best cards and then they're going to play all the best cards. I do think you should have good mana. It opens up creativity. But the other thing, even outside of like power maxing, it has the potential to do is if players perceive multicolor mush to be the best thing going on, even if it isn't, making like triomes with fetches and everything else, it just kind of creates a situation where you might have like these intended strategies of the way different colors play with one another, fit together, whatever. But if it's easy to just play like all the best cards all the time, then it kind of like makes mush out of your design. So that's just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, I think our decks have looked, since the exclusion of triomes, I think our decks look more centralized and cohesive. Like they look like they're doing a thing more consistently. They look less soupy than they did before we got the triomes.
This is like a totally separate topic, and I don't want to go deep on it, but this is what I will say about mana. I think it is cool to have your mana be good enough that people can play lots of different colors if they want to. My advice to you would be to make the mana good enough that 2-color decks are super smooth, that 3-color decks are definitely workable if you pay some attention to how you draft your mana base, and 4+ color decks are also possible, but your players have to decide they're going to give up on some good cards or make some concessions during the draft in order to pull it off. Right? You don't want it to be trivial to play every color in your cube. But that's a whole separate topic I don't want to get into too much.
Yeah, and just final thought on this topic, like that is the exact reason that I've become so disillusioned with the Vintage Cube. And we'll do the Vintage Cube Sucks episode at some point, but every deck can just play 4th Aerolingus because the mana is insanely good. Like, you could be a black-green deck and you get past, like, 5th pick 4th Aerolingus and you're like, okay, I'll play that. And I'll just get the mana fixing at some point with whatever lands come around because there's so many of them and they all tap for 5 colors or whatever because it's fetches and triomes and shocks and surveils and stuff like that. So
yeah,
I just don't like how Vintage Cube decks are just slop piles of either combo or like just every powerful card you can possibly play with like no real considerations for mana because the mana is just so easy to get online.
Yeah, that's a totally separate topic because there you are kind of buying into like, okay, we're just trying to play the best cards possible.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit more fine, but yeah, generally
it's part of the premise of Vintage Cube that you can do that, but it's part of the reason I don't like it. And if you're not intentionally going for that vibe, like that's the type of thing that can come out of just having insanely good mana. Which I'm not saying don't play triomes so much as like observe what having really, really good mana in your cube does for your decks. Are you seeing 2-color decks get fielded out by 4-color piles week after week? Well, maybe consider cutting back on that mana a little bit.
Yeah, and like last thing on this for me is even when you're playing in power maxed environments, stuff like the Timeless Cube or the cube we call the Doug Cube, things like that are just these environments that are intended to be playing the most powerful, most egregious things you could be doing with different small restraints. There's still tier lists or priorities on the most powerful cards, right? If you go play the Timeless Cube, like Lutry's still broken. It is broken in a pile of broken cards. The Sunfall in all of these cubes are super powerful. There's the Modern Horizon 3 1 and 2 drops are super, super powerful. So like there are orders to these things, right? Where even in your most powerful environments, like Psychic Frog's still probably better than 95% of the other options. So like you're never going to have that flat power level that Chris was talking about. And those power outliers, the better your mana, they do get more obvious. But just know that like if you're playing in an environment and you don't explicitly have the goal of trying to maximize the available power, that there are going to be cards that really, really stick out like sore thumbs.
For sure. All right, reason number 3 that your cube sucks. You're playing a 360 card cube as a 540. And note that I didn't say you're playing a 540 card cube. You're allowed to do that. There are 540 card cubes that are well built that exist. But I specifically said you're playing a 360 as a 540. And I think this is, you could even substitute 450 in here for 540 instead some amount of the time. But I think a lot of people as a first-time cube designer have a compulsion to go for higher cube counts for variety's sake, right? To add more variance. But I mean, I'm a 360 stan through and through when it comes to new cube designs because you want to see everything get drafted, right? As soon as you go up to 540 or 450, and 540 is egregious for a new cube, I think. But as soon as you go up to 450, there's going to be some number of cards that just don't get drafted that you're never going to get information about, which is not good for a cube that's debuting, right? You want to see how everything works. If there are 90 cards sitting on the sideline that can't even be opened, played, sideboarded, whatever, you're leaving, a pretty big chunk of percentage of cards on the sideline that you will get no information about. So when you're building a new cube, we've gone over this in the cube design series, but I think limit yourself to 360. And I've noticed so many people want to go to 450 immediately. I think we actually did with the Jank Diver cube as well.
We did,
like,
and it was a mistake.
As 450.
It was a mistake.
And like we fell into the same pitfall of like, oh, we want variants, blah, blah, blah. We want to see different things. And it's like, that's okay once you've identified how things actually work. But you don't want variants from day one, do you? Like, I see going to 450 as the equivalent of playing a 41 card draft deck. It's just like, you don't want to cut cards. You don't want to like make the hard decisions to cut cards. And like, there are reasons to go up to 450, especially like the reason we maintain a 450 card cube is not because we want a cube with a ton of variants. It's because sometimes we get 10 drafters and we need to have a 450 card cube to support 10 drafters. But 540 is egregious. Some people do it. The vintage cube is 540. Danelius has a fantastic 540 card cube. I would say there are flaws even in a design like that, and like, no offense to Danelius, but like, once you get to 540, there are just issues that come up with consistency and stuff like that. You get a lot of variants, but you also just like don't get as much information on a lot of stuff that you really want. Like, new set came out, I'm going to add these 15 to 20 cards to my 540 card cube, and I didn't see this card get played a single time over 3 weeks because it was never opened by any of my drafters. Like, that's the sort of thing you're signing up for with these larger cube sizes.
And here's the other thing, and I kind of referenced this earlier in the episode, but that 3 week span for most people, if you got one draft in, you were lucky. And so, you're just, I think people assume in the back of their mind that their cube is going to get played a lot more than it actually will. And so if you're trying to see all the things that your cube can do, if you're trying to have this experience with cubing, like, if you're not the Jank Diver Gaming Cube or the Jank Diver Gaming Peasant Cube in our server, you are very, very fortunate if you get played twice a month. Like we have a few cubes that show up pretty regularly a couple of times a month. But most of our cubes get cycled in once a month, once every other month, that sort of thing. And so you don't need this bigger experience because your cube's just not going to get played enough. Just play the tighter cube and then make changes to it. And then if if it ends up being one of those that's played more frequently, maybe you can. But most cubes are not played enough to justify the larger size.
Yeah, and the crux here is that, like, I don't think 540 is a bad thing inherently, but I think you need a reason to go to 540 or even a reason to go to 450.
Justin Parnell has entered the chat. Sorry, his podcast was called the 540.
The 540. Yeah. And maybe we can discuss, like, very, very briefly, like, what those reasons to go to 540 are. But to Teld's point, usually you want to go for a higher cube size if you're getting a ton of reps in, right? And B, you want to kind of already have a solid foundation for how everything works in a 360 card version to kind of like have a feel for like what needs the extra density of support at 450, what kind of effects do I need to show up, what's okay if like it doesn't get extra support, like is it spells is just always going to have support at any cube size no matter what, so you don't really need to like filter in a bunch of extra payoffs for is it spells and stuff like that. So have a reason to go to the higher cube counts, but especially if you are a first time cube designer, start at 360, make the hard decisions on cuts and get that full information. You will see the cards that end up in people's sideboards, and that's a decision point, like that's a bullet point for you to be like, oh, this card didn't get played. Whereas you can't make a claim like that if the card just ended up in the 90 cards on the sideline that never even got drafted.
Yeah. So to throw out some reasons, the biggest reason I think for 540, and I think this is one of the things that works in Danelius's cube's favor, is that it gives a much wider range. So it kind of has this, your synergies get looser, right? They get more generic. And so you end up having this more like emergent sort of synergies where you're kind of looking to piece together little random things that kind of work together, as opposed to having a very curated synergistic experience. And so, for example, Danelius's cube could be called the 17 lands banger cube, would probably be an accurate name for that cube. And he's trying to, in sort of a sense, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but my understanding is he's trying to replicate kind of a retail limited-esque experience with, where your decks look a lot different because you don't always open the same cards. And so then when you're playing 540, a card like Image Recruiter or Battle Screech that are super egregious, and we saw them all the time when we played them at 360, they're still just as powerful, but they don't always show up. They don't always get opened early enough for you to actually build around them. So they're a little more distributed throughout the cube, and you can decide for yourself whether that's something you want or not, but it does mean you're not seeing them every single draft. And it does mean that they have this kind of like more emergent vibe, right, where you're having to piece together random cards because there's just not this tight focused idea for what your decks are going to look like.
You have a point here as well that I think is really good about streamer bait, which the vintage cube is 540. I believe every arena cube, the chromatic cube, and Tinker's cube, I believe they're all 540, and I think the 540 works for those cubes because part of the goal of those cubes is to get people to play them over and over and over and over again, and they get so many reps in because they're just so easily accessible that, like, I think 540 is acceptable there, maybe even preferred there, right? Like, it's fun to see Newmont the Nummy open up like different cards from draft to draft to draft. Otherwise, he would just find the deck that he likes the most and just do it every single time. So I think 540 works for like the streamer experience, like the YouTube watching someone else play experience. I think as far as like the play experience itself, even put yourself in the shoes of the drafter, right? Like, don't you want some reassurances that like if you go into archetype A, that the support cards are actually going to be there for it? Like, especially if there's like really niche like A plus B type cards. Like, it really sucks to be the person who's like, I'm going to take part A of this combo, but I don't know if part B is even going to get opened. Like, that just doesn't feel good to me. It's part of the reason I think having things like Splinter Twin combo in Vintage Cube is just really silly. But
I think there are a lot of reasons that you could do this. I think the best reason that I can think of to like not insist on a huge cube is if it doesn't get played that often and you're a designer and you want to see how your cards and your choices are actually working, then it's in your best interest to just make sure that the whole cube gets opened, right? If you're cubing a ton, I can see like one in the variety, but I would definitely start out with the 360 for some of the reasons that you outlined. I don't think larger cube sizes are bad necessarily, but until you know how to like, especially if you're designing a cube that you like would really like to play a lot, like you want to get people interested in it and familiar with it, the only way to really accomplish that is to make sure that the environment is functioning as intended. So like if you're building if you're building anything for a first time, like say you're building like a machine for the first time, like a prototype of something that you want to build, eliminating as many possible failure points and variables so you can see if your concept even works is where you want to start, and then you can start layering it on. Just it's if you want your project to have longevity and generate some interest, don't jump the gun and make like a 720 card cube because you can't kill your darlings, because if you don't get a lot of reps of the cube, you don't even really know what your darlings are, unless of course like the exception to this rule is if you really like your cube as like the idea of your cube as like a collection that you look at on Cube Cobra, there's nothing wrong with that. We're talking about this from the perspective of like your players' play experience is kind of how I would frame it.
This compounds with the themes being too narrow, right? The first reason we gave, right? If you have narrow themes already, like going up to 540 is just going to stretch them even further. So that's just, if you're doing the Dungeons and Dragons cube, please don't come to the Jank Diver gaming community and be like, I want to debut my 540 card Dungeons and Dragons cube, because we're gonna tell you no. Like, we're gonna tell you no, and we're also gonna refer you to this episode. So Chris did kind of bring up the next point here, which reason number 4 that your cube sucks is you're not killing your darlings. Like, it is, I think it's totally okay to have pet cards, right? Like, I do not want to get between someone and their pet cards in a cube. And we bring this up sometimes. It's like, why is this here? And people's response is, I just like the card. And it's like, okay, that's really all I need to hear. But there are times that, like, keeping your darlings, keeping your favorite cards, keeping these, like, sentimental cards around is actually a detriment. to your cube, right? Especially when they're overpowered, but also when they're just underpowered, right? There are cards that have clung on for years and years and years, and it's like it's time to let them go, right? An example that comes to mind: Vendilion Click, right? Vendilion Click was never really that good in our cube. There was a time like maybe a year ago where it was fine when it was first introduced. It's clearly worse than other blue 3s. But, like, seeing Vendilion Click in, like, a vintage cube, I'm like, no, sir. Like, that card is not good anymore, and maybe hasn't been good for, like, 5 years, but there are people who cling on to it because it's, like, a classic. Dark Confidant, another good example, right? Dark Confidant's the type of card that some people are just super, super attached to. And if you are, and you just want a cube that has Dark Confidant in it, like, I'm not going to tell you no, but I do want you to put a little asterisk next to that card and say, okay, this is underpowered. The drafter who has it is probably not getting the optimal version of the effect, or this is using cube equity that could be used on a different card that's more appropriate to the power level of the cube. But sometimes you got to kill your darlings. We've seen this happen with us as well. Like, I think Prime Time was a good example. You know, Primeval Titan was a card that Chris just wanted to play because it's Primeval Titan, and it's like, we finally got it. Let's play it. And it was not good. It was never good.
No, it was not. It was not fabulous.
But we also just wanted to see Prime Time in the list, and eventually we had to say, you know what? Old Yeller, take it out back, put it down. Like, it's time. And I think people should do that maybe a little more often, right? You got to get those Solemn Simulacrums out of your commander decks, folks. Like, I'm sorry, I know you don't want to hear it, but Solemn Simulacrum, it's not the card it used to be in Commander, but, you know, that sort of thing for Cube, basically, is what I'm getting at with this
Does it still show up in every precon?
It's a fine card, but it's not must play 99 staple status anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, there's
controversial opinion.
I think, like, you know, obviously pet cards are kind of, they can develop over time too. Like, everybody knows how much I love Koglin Yudaro and Quintorius Loremaster. And, like, I acknowledge right now, I think those cards are excellent. They're super powerful cards in our cube. But I also acknowledge there might come a time down the road where we just get cards that are better than them or more efficient or whatever, and it might come time that we have to take them out back, and hopefully we don't ever have to do that. I would love if those cards just remain awesome forever, but like in the state of modern Magic design, if you're keeping up with the times, your cards are going to get power crept. You know, I know Chris is a big fan of Dragonkin Berserker, and that card's coming in out of the cube a few times, and I still think it's a good solid card, but it's one of those things where these cards, like, even though you like them and they may be good, you have to acknowledge that with every set there's a possibility that Wizards just prints a strictly better version of whatever you're playing, because that's just how power creep works in modern Magic. And you have to decide, you know, are you going to keep those cards in because you like them, or are you going to let them go because we've gotten better options?
I mean, imagine we get a better Jadar like tomorrow, right? Like, not strictly better, maybe something different than
okay. I'm disagreeing with my own podcast.
What I'm talking about.
We'll never cut my boy. He's just out here raising corpses. He's being so good.
We can all agree, right? It's fair to say that Chris has probably the most emotional attachment to individual cards of the three of us.
That seems possible.
Because I don't give a shit. Like, my favorite cards are things like Clarion Spirit. I'm like, get that motherfucker out of here. There's something better than it. Like,
I don't know. Like, I will have to admit, you guys have mentioned before cutting Kogel and Yudaro, and I've told you to get your hands off the monkey. Like, just back up. Don't even try it.
Yeah,
this is a family. This is a family podcast. Teld, get out of here.
Oh man. Yeah, they're like, people will go to bat for cards, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to like cards, but it's also okay to recognize when a card.
Dear Magic players, it's okay to like cards.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next point. That was just a quick one. All right, we got two more broad categories here to go through. Reason number 5 that your cube sucks: you're not acting on player feedback. And this is interesting. Danelius actually said something really funny in our Peasant, like, 2024 review. He was like, I just don't listen to player feedback. And, like, I thought he was joking, but then he was in chat yesterday while we were drafting one of the cubes in our server, and he said it again, and I was like, I wonder if, like, he's actually being serious, where he just, like, does not pay attention to player feedback and just kind of, like, does his own thing. I think he was joking. I'm not sure. He can certainly elaborate for us, but I think player feedback's very, very important. Like, I imagine you go to CubeCon, like people draft your cube, they tell you what they thought of it and stuff like that. And sometimes people are just overly positive when it's in person and things like that. But like we've made a lot of decisions based on how our not the designers, but how the actual drafters engage with our cube. And sometimes it gets to a point where it's like people just dislike this thing so much that you can defend it as the cube designer, but you should probably make a change for your drafters. And I think this applies more to people who are getting the same drafters in and out, right? Like if some random person who we've never drafted with before shows up to a draft and then tells us like, oh, I didn't like this thing or I really like this thing, but then we never hear from them again, we're probably not going to act on that, right? But if, for instance, Carbon, who drafts our Peasant Cube over and over and over again and is one of our regular drafters, tells us that Writhen Chrysalis is a terrible card to have in our Peasant Cube and hates it and hates the experience of it, and like every single week he's having a terrible experience because of the existence of this one card in the cube, like maybe we need to sit back and say, okay, should we cut this card from our cube? Even if, you know, Teld and I don't agree that it's problematic, it's actually like harming someone's experience in the cube, and the benefit of having it there isn't like huge, so we can act on that. This is probably a topic on its own at some point, is how to engage with player feedback and how to act on player feedback. So we got to keep it brief here, but like any recommendations on like how to actually engage with the feedback that people are giving you for your cube? Because it's easy to just ignore things when people are like, you know, they got super crushed by better drafters and they're like, there's too much removal, there's not enough removal, or whatever.
That's a classic.
Yeah, the feedback is not always in earnest. It's not always coming from a place of like, it's not always coming from a informed place so much as a place of emotion based on like what actually happened in one particular match. So like any recommendations on how to engage with player feedback when people say they either do or don't like something that's going on in your cube?
Yeah, 100%. I have some thoughts on this.
Okay.
Sometimes your drafters, sometimes the person offering you feedback is just wrong. Like sometimes they're just wrong. Magic players tend to be competitive people. If they lost to a card that you know is fine, you know, there's a very strong possibility that somebody, if they're, you know, shrugging off the sting of just having been completely dismantled by something, you know, might hold forth an opinion, and it's just noise, right? They're just upset that they like lost to the card. It's not an inappropriate power level. Like, you're aware of that. However, I would especially like not try to take player feedback into account too much if they're really obviously like upset. But if you are engaging with players that you like respect, especially if you're hearing the same opinion from multiple sources, like even if you've done your like let's say you've done your geometric distribution of the amount of like Doom blades that you have, and it's where you theoretically want it, or whatever, like that's all fine and good, but it's possible that in the context of the creatures that you've chosen, how they get value or whatever, that has sort of like a contextual influence on how good it feels to play against that much removal. If like one person loses and they're really salty and they say something to you, like think about it, but like hold open the possibility that they're just upset. If you're hearing a like consistent theme from your players, like a consistent thing that we hear repeatedly, and I still do take this with a grain of salt because I understand it's frustrating to lose to blue, even if you're on even footing. But I think the general understanding in our community right now is like blue's really frustrating to play against, and like because we're hearing it from multiple sources, we're hearing it consistently, we're hearing it from good players. It's something that we're thinking about like going into the future. So, you know, in short, like trust your gut, but if you keep hearing the same things over and over again, you've probably got a problem.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of examples of this that are actually both black cards. So Meat Hook Massacre was one that we had in the cube for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, you know, it started out with just a couple of drafters being like, oh, I lost to Meat Hook. Oh, God, Meat Hook swept me. Or, oh, Meat Hook was in a crazy aristocrat engine. But then it just became like an every draft thing. Like, and we started noticing that it's like, oh, yeah, well, they do have a point. You know, every time this card resolves, the player who resolves it kind of just wins the game. And then, you know, eventually we ended up cutting it. And I think we're kind of getting there a little bit with Aquazats in that it is like there's kind of a concern about the resiliency of a lot of creatures and how they're really resilient to removal. But when you actually look at the list, I'm kind of begin wondering, is it just Aquazats? Is that like the card is that just the card that's like super resilient to removal? And then you watch people play it, it's like, well, I killed it, And then we were in a protracted game, so my opponent just put it back into play, and I didn't have a second removal spell to it, so I died. And it's like, all right, well, yeah, you were playing a mid-range deck, and both of you kind of grinded each other out, and then Aclazotz is like actually unkillable. And it's like, okay, well, now we have to analyze, is that a problematic play pattern? You know, is that something that we think is unhealthy for the cube? And, you know, we're not moving quick on it because it's not obviously just tearing apart the cube, but I do think when you have multiple people start to be like, well, this card is just actually undealable with for like 90% of the removal in the cube, you do have to start actually looking at it and thinking if that's something you want, whether it's power level appropriate or not, if it's just a fun and healthy play pattern.
That's a good point. Is like maybe a good way to think about this too is if you get player feedback, like don't necessarily go off the deep end right immediately and just assume that you've got a problem. But if you maybe finish your games up early, you have an opportunity to watch another player's game, or even if you're not done, but you're just the designer and you want to kind of take a look at how something's playing. Like if you're paper drafting with your friends or whatever, and you hear Aclazotz hit the table, like maybe pause your own game for a second and go and like watch how that card is playing out. You know what I mean? Like trust but verify, I guess, would be the best way to frame this. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, I labeled this, you're not acting on player feedback. It should be something like you're not acting on repeated player feedback, like consistent player feedback or something like that. Like there's got to be a narrative to something beyond just like, oh, this card that we just put in from Pioneer Masters went 3-0 tonight for the first draft that we did. And they're like, oh, this was broken. Because you'll hear that like the first time, oh, such and such was broken, for the first run in the cube. And it's like, what are you going to do? Go remove it from the cube immediately? No, you want to see, like maybe it's a Nadu level card where it's very clear because of the way it actually played out. But most of the time it's like, okay, the next week it went 1-2. It's sort of like maybe we can cool it down. Maybe we don't have to act on it right away.
And like the truth is too that we kind of talked about this a little bit, but like you're gonna have different levels of player feedback. If you've got players who are very able to articulate their thoughts and you trust them and you know that they don't overreact to things, when they start telling you they think a card is problematic, it's a lot easier to accept that than when someone who is always the sky is falling or is always, getting very upset starts telling you things. It's easier to dismiss that as just being emotional or just being overreacting. Compared to someone who, kind of just is like, hey, look, I know this card I felt like was super oppressive and this is why. And they give you, 2 or 3 reasons. And you can pay attention to that and be like, oh, yeah, that's a fair point.
We're talking about constructive negative feedback here too, but the opposite's kind of true too. Like sometimes your drafters will be like, hey, I would really like to see such and such, like positive feedback about what's working and what they want to see and stuff like that. We've made concessions sometimes with cards that we're not super hot on that some of our drafters had suggested or things that feel like they would fit based off player feedback. So like take the positive with the negative, what do people want to see versus what do people not want to see, and kind of like meld that all together into an experience that your drafters are going to appreciate, especially when you have repeated drafters, right? It's different when you get a different crew every single week, but we've got our, solidified team of like 10 to 20 people who come in and out of our cubes regularly, and we kind of have a feel for what they like and what they don't like, and they give us a lot of good feedback. So we listen to them and we adapt accordingly, a good 50% of our cube is what do we want to see in the cube, but the other 50% is what do our, regular drafters want to see in the cube as well.
Absolutely.
Final point number 6, and this one's not one that I feel super strongly about, but I wanted to mention it here at the end to wrap things up. But number 6, why your cube sucks. Just keep hammering that home. You're not engaging with anything outside of just your cube, and I don't think you have to necessarily, right? You can just play your cube, and that can be your Magic experience when it comes to cubing, but I feel like there's missed opportunity if that's the case. So
this one's directed at me, isn't it?
I was actually going to say I get on to Chris about this all the time.
Well, I thought about Chris when writing this. Chris was not the reason that like prompted me to write this in, but it was like while I was writing, I was like, this does apply to Chris. I'm not going to mention him by name, but now that it's out in the open, go ahead and wipe the sweat from my brow real quick. No, so I do think I think this is true of a lot of cube designers, actually, who their experience with cube is solely their own cubes, and I think that's okay. Like, that's what they like to do. That's how they want to engage with Magic. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think there are missed opportunities when you don't engage with other cubes. And I'm not saying you have to go to every server and draft everybody else's cubes, but like having a pulse on what other people are doing, or even just having a pulse on like retail limited is sometimes really good, because that's how you find out a card like Unable to Scream or Witch Stalker Frenzy is actually like something that you could play in your cube, because we would never, none of us would land on Unable to Scream if we didn't play Duskmourn, right? Like, it would just never come up in conversation. And another thing that prompted this, again, Danelius's 540 card Peasant Cube, we drafted that a couple times and we're like, you know what, this is actually rock solid. There's something going on here. And it's a different enough experience from the Jank Diver Peasant Cube that we're actually picking up some ideas from this, which we wouldn't get if we just, never played other people's Peasant Cubes and stuff like that. So I think, again, I'm not saying, hey, you have to go out and like go to CubeCon and play every cube you can and gather information and check notes and stuff like that. But I do think it helps a lot to engage with other cube communities, to other cube designers, and even just retail limited to some extent. Yeah, I think this point is just to kind of like help cube creators avoid the echo chamber of like, what works in my cube is what cube actually is at large. And I don't think that's necessarily true, because then you like convert over to like Arena Cube and it's like, wow, this is just such a different experience. And you don't have to like it. I don't like Arena Cube, but you do get ideas from other cubes. So keep yourself open to engaging with other things outside of your own cube, not directed at any particular cube designers from the Jank Diver Gaming Cube community in particular. But
yeah, play retail limited.
Just wanted to throw that in.
It's good.
Play draft. I think there's merit to like poking around in other places.
Well, I think there's other times too where, for example, I think looking at constructed can occasionally be handy. Like, oftentimes those decks are more synergistic, or like they can build around a specific plan. But there's a few cards that we've picked up for the cube. Like, for example, I would say Deep Cavern Bats is one that came up as like, I saw that card consistently playing constructed, played with it myself. I was like, oh, this card's kind of messed up. And that was why we ended up testing it in our cube, and it was very good. And then there's other things like, just being aware of like good cards. I know that I get kind of panned on this a little bit, but one of my defenses of Fairy Mastermind is it's been a 4 of in every standard, in like the best standard deck for like 2 years. And
not a good argument.
And
that is the reason to play cards. Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's a reason necessarily to play cards, but I do think you have to like give a card a second notice when it's been a major player in a constructed format. I do think that is something to consider, something at least to consider, if not, to use as like a pure data point. It's just like something to acknowledge, right? But cubed is obviously different than constructed, but just paying attention to these different things. Sometimes you'll see cool sideboard cards that actually might fit in cube, or good mainboard cards that you wouldn't have considered otherwise. It's the same thing as playing retail, just being kind of at least vaguely aware of the pulse of some constructed formats, even if you don't engage with them a ton yourself.
Is it Lucky Paper Magic? I might be making this up. Maybe it's just a Cube Cobra aggregate thing and it's not Lucky Paper Magic, but I seem to remember that Lucky Paper Magic does some sort of aggregate thing with new cards from new sets included in cubes.
No, it's not. They don't do a thing about it being included in cubes. They do a community survey where they basically, they don't really do like full bore all fucking day like set reviews like we do. They sort of survey the community and they report the statistics on how many of their listeners are reporting that they're going to test a card, and what their expected performance level from that card is.
Yeah, okay, so that's the type of thing I'm talking about too, where like that's the type of thing you can clue in on and maybe like discover something that the community at large is excited about that didn't really, catch your eye at all. And obviously, like, go listen to Lucky Paper Magic, go listen to other Cube podcasts if you want more insight on what people are actually engaging with from new sets and stuff like that. That's an easy way to have a pulse on the community rather than just like ignoring, these are the 10 cards I picked out from a new set. This is what I'm going to play. You're probably missing out on something there, I'm sure. So listening to other community members kind of tell you what they're interested in can be a good way to get some fresh ideas for your own cube.
Sorry, the last reason that your cube sucks, you're not consuming enough of our podcast. And you're not drafting with us, so listen especially carefully to Tim's plugs at the end here.
Yeah, you need to come draft with us and make sure you watch our Build a Cube series and other, content. It'll make you better. Clearly.
Yeah, I mean, our cube hasn't sucked since Modern Horizons 3.
Correct.
At all. There was definitely nothing from that set that made things problematic. Look, again, if you're a new cube designer, first off, if you have an emotional reaction to the title of this video, you didn't get this far in the video, so I don't know who I'm talking to exactly at this point, but again, the point is not oh, you're such terrible cube designers. It's so much as hey, we made all these mistakes. These are things that we see in cubes that are debuting on our server, and we really do care about the experience of our drafters. So these are things to, if not just make actions on right now, at least think about them during cube design. At least think about do I really need to be playing a 540 card cube? Do I really need to make changes because one of my drafters said that such and such was broken? It's no, these are bullet points to improve your cube design chops more so than things you have to go change your cube around right now. So your cube doesn't suck. That's the end of the story. We let off with your cube sucks, but it doesn't suck. It has room for improvement. It always will. But there are things you can do to improve it over time. So remember, you can find us on Twitter at JankDaverGaming. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/JankDaverGaming. You can find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/Teld Talks, TELD Talks. And if you have recommendations on how to make cubes better, come let us know about them as well. And obviously give us your feedback on our cubes. That's how we make our cubes something that we're proud of and something we enjoy playing with other people. Future episodes, I think I believe we are going to hit spoiler season for Ether Drift on the 21st of this month, and then it releases on Arena on the 11th of February. So we still got, I think, probably 2 more episodes worth, maybe 1, depending on when spoilers wrap up. So we'll have something coming at you next week. I think we threw around the idea of starting off a series about monocolored sections and things like that. So we'll see if that ends up being what we talk about next.
And then it's infinite spoiler season.
Yeah, well, we get to ignore Innistrad Remastered, right? We just don't care about Innistrad Remastered. It's a paper-only set, so...
Oh, yeah, never know. Well, there won't even be anything to discuss for most cubers anyway, because they're not releasing any new cards with that, are they?
Oh, no, Innistrad... There might be rarity downshifts, but that's probably the only thing I can imagine. So yeah, Innistrad Remaster, a little bit of a bust for us. We will not be talking about that. Ether Drift will be the next set review, but that'll be probably closer to February than closer to now. So we'll see. We'll have something in between now and then at least. So stay tuned for next episode. Thanks as always for joining us, and we'll catch you lovely folks next time.
You got to sign off for us?
You guys got 5 minutes?
Yeah. Sam, I always have time.
Good, because we're kicking off 2025 the right way with a totally fair, impeccably balanced game where the contestants both are treated equally and given the same opportunity to win. This is scripted, by the way.
God,
this is scripted.
Me. Okay.
Last time we played this game, Teld and Chris competed to explain as many cards as they could from booster packs of their favorite limited sets. The competition was fierce, but Teld took it away in a landslide, earning himself a much-deserved trophy, which tied the score with Chris's coveted title of Nomenclature Norman. You'll remember that one from the early days, which he won in a fair, emphasis on fair competition that involved stating the full name of legendary creatures. This time, we'll be playing a simple game called Name That Creature Type, where our contestants will be naming the creature types of a list of creatures based solely on the name of the cards. After further accusations of foul play by the community, we've made sure both players have equally challenging lists. On the line today, the special title of Typology Tyrone.
Oh
Teld,
my god.
Teld, you'll be the first player. Are you ready?
All right.
I will read you a card name, and you simply need to tell me the creature type of the card.
Okay, sure. Let's go for it.
Teld, your first card is Werefox Bodyguard.
Is it an elf soldier? Elf Werefox soldier? Something like that?
I'm going to look it up real quick, but that's incorrect. Werefox Bodyguard is an elf fox knight, sorry.
Well, I was going to get it wrong, too. I was going to go elf fox soldier.
I did. Hey, I remembered it was an elf.
Yeah, that's the important part.
Yeah, because Tim is notoriously racist against
I was called racist about this card for some
very
reason.
real elves. Yeah, elves are not typically foxes. This is the level of collective grievance we've arrived at. It's a great time to be alive. Anyway, go ahead.
Chris, your first card is named Dragon Egg.
Ooh, God, I want to say that the creature type is the same exact thing as the card.
I'm going to need you to lock in an answer that consists of only creature types.
Dragon egg?
That's correct.
Oh
Congratulations.
my God.
Dragon egg is in fact a dragon egg. Teld, your time to redeem yourself. And I heard you type something. You better not be cheating. Your second card is Thrumming Bird.
Is it a Phyrexian bird?
Ooh, I can't accept that. It's actually a Phyrexian bird horror. Though, good job on getting Phyrexian there because that was eroded later on down the line. Chris, your second card is Cat Warriors. I repeat, the name of the card is Cat Warriors.
Okay. I'm going to say that it is a Hound Citizen.
That is incorrect, and I'm not. Again, this game is fair and balanced, so we have to accept that as an incorrect answer. But yeah, that's going to put you at 0 to 1. Teld, your third answer or your third card is Priest of Gix.
Is it a Phyrexian human cleric?
So close. It actually, for some reason, has 4 creature types. It's a Phyrexian human cleric minion.
Oh my God.
All 4 of those creature types appear on the most recent printing of that card. 0-3, but don't worry. There will be a redemption round. Chris, your third card is Fungus Sliver. We really fumbled the ball with Cat Warrior, so I want to repeat the name of this card is Fungus Sliver.
Okay. I'm gonna go with a Fungus Sliver. That's my final answer.
How does he do it? It's correct.
Truly, his typology is just unmatched.
All right, so Teld, technically you're 0-3. There's one more card on this list. You can't win by normal rules, but I will give you an opportunity to win the competition here. So if you can name every eligible creature type on this next card, you'll receive enough points to win the entire competition. And as a bonus, I'll even allow you to look up the card on Scryfall if you wish. So are you ready for the final card?
Oh God. What? Go ahead. Whatever.
Okay, I'm going to give you, let's say, 10 seconds to name all the eligible creature types. So your final card is Morophon the Boundless. Is it every creature type? Do I have to name them specifically? I need you to name every viable creature type for this card, and you have about 4 seconds left.
Interesting. This card is every creature type. It's a shapeshifter, human, knight.
Ooh, out of time.
Oh my God.
Unfortunately, you couldn't cram all 300 plus creature types in 10 seconds. All right, well, just for the sake of closing things out, I want to see if Chris would have gotten his final one, even though he's kind of won by default now. Chris, your final card is called Camel. The name of the card is Camel.
Okay, as a creature type, I'm going to go with Tobacco Mascot.
It's actually a capybara. No, the creature type is camel. So Teld, I'm sorry, but that was a clean reverse sweep there.
I don't know how I'm ever going to compete with Chris's knowledge of creature types. He's clearly much better at it.
He's officially in addition to nomenclature Norman, he's now officially typology Tyrone is what I think I typed. I'm wearing
so many fucking hats these days.
All bow.
Are you more of a detective hat guy or more of a cowboy hat guy? Like, what are we into?
So I think the modern American conception of cowboys is really lame, and I hate contemporary country music with fiery passion that I'm sure Hank Williams would share. So I'm going to go with detective hat.
Good answer.
Get the rhinestones off your jeans, you fucking pussies. Okay, I managed to sneak in something controversial in this episode.
All right. Worth it. Well, that was a good game, but we were playing by Yu-Gi-Oh! Battle City rules, so now that I've won the match, you have to give me the best card in your deck. Oh, man. Yeah, you're right. Sucks to lose my best card this way, but the rules are the rules. Here you go. Hey, thanks for being a good sport about it. I'll make sure this card sees plenty of play, and... Hey, what the hell is this, man? Oh, that's my best card. I lost, so it's yours now. No, I know that, but... Why are you handing me a Llanowar Elves? Llanowar Elves is the best card in my deck. No, man. I almost lost to the Dragon Lord Atarka, and before that you were absolutely crushing me with that Kogla and Yadaro. I'd like for you to hand me one of those. I don't know, man. I'm pretty sure all the other stuff only worked because I had a Llanowar Elves in play on turn 1. No, you don't understand. Llanowar Elves is just a mana dork. It accelerates out the haymakers that actually win you the game. The actual best cards in your deck. Well, the way I see it, no turn 1 Elves, no turn 3 Xenagos, no turn 4 Atarka, ergo, Llanowar Elves is the card that makes everything work. It's the best card in the deck. That's so stupid, man. You can get these out of bulk bins at any LGS. They come in the starter decks. You should give me something at least a little bit more valuable. Look, dude, I need you to put a little respect on Llanowar Elves' names. This is an alpha card we're talking about here. That version's from Dominaria. Yeah, but it was in alpha. Okay, look, clearly we're not going to get anywhere. Let's just call the judge over to decide. Judge? Well, hello, gentlemen. What seems to be the problem here? Okay, so I just won our match, and the rules state that my opponent owes me the best card in their deck. I think it should be one of the big battle cruisers that almost beat me, but my opponent's trying to pawn off a worthless Llanowar Elves. Can you just settle this for us? Why, of course, gentlemen. Mind if I see the deck there for a moment? Yeah, sure, of course. Just be careful with the Llanowar Elves, please. Yes, of course. Yes, I see. Okay. All right, this seems pretty easy. Here you go. The best card in your opponent's deck. A basic forest? Seriously? That's right. No forest means no Llanowar Elves, which means no Xenagos, which means no Atarka. Ergo, Forest is the best card in your opponent's deck. You know, I'm just gonna go home and play some Shovel Knight.